leading in a crisis or in a chaotic type situation, if you find yourself in that, the first thing you want to think about is it's not a crisis. Not in the sense of the word, because when you start using terms like crisis and chaotic, it sets up a negative attitude. That all of a sudden is this overwhelming? And to me, what you have is a business problem. And what are you paid for? Solving business problems. And if you treat it that way, it becomes an immeasurable range.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rishi Katz, and welcome to the Oval Table, where we discuss all things related to helping those who live and work within your business how to survive, thrive, avoid pitfalls, have more fun, and become successful faster. Getting advice and input from someone outside of your business can make a big difference, and that's what we seek to do for you each and every week. Here at the Oval Table, we believe that every voice matters, and we want to model how that works. Often the advice that makes the difference comes from where you least expect it. We seek every week to provide a lens for a different way to do business. So much more is possible when everyone's ideas make it to the table. Let me introduce you to our co-hosts, Carl Walsh, Vaughn Johnson, and Doug Bowers. What do you guys have for our listeners this week?
We have with us today a recognized expert on leadership and leadership principles, Jim Hearn, and we'll get to him in just a few minutes. But first, we want to talk about the positive consequences and the negative consequences of the decisions you make and how you make them.
Every decision that a business owner makes has an impact on the health and success of their business. We thought we'd take a couple of minutes to talk about the consequences and benefits of good decision making and the consequences and not so beneficial impact of bad decision making. Doug, go ahead.
Well, one of the things about decision making is that you need to think about the ramifications of a decision before you make the decision, before you put it in place. And you probably need to run it by the Oval Table if it's a decision of any consequence, so that you get outside input other than your own, and you get an educated response from people on the ground in the business trying to make decisions. If down the road we ask you, how can the people in the back, what kind of contribution are they making? What kind of ideas they have? And you say, they don't know anything. They're just there. Then the question becomes, who hired them in the first place? And if it was you, then we're back to this quality of decision thing. Are you making quality decisions, or are you just making decisions? And I think you have to think about the unintended consequences of a decision. We're going to lay some people off this week because our cost numbers are out of line. Okay. What's the impact of that decision? Oh, we're going to save some labor dollars. Okay. Well, what's the impact on the people who are getting laid off for a while? And how happy are they going to be? And are you undermining their support and spirit for the business? You have to think about all the little tendrils that come off a decision and realize that something you might not have thought about turns out to be a problem down the road, or it's a problem for somebody else. If you're telling somebody in one department, say, I need you to do this, but that's digging a hole for somebody in another department, then that's a bad decision. Another way of looking at decisions is to look at the decisions that have been made in the past and then look at how they have turned out. And if they have uniformly turned out poorly, then one needs to go back and do a serious examination of how I'm making decisions and how should I be making decisions, as opposed to, I just say it's the way it should be, and so it goes on from there. But you also have to focus in on a decision about who you do business with, who you keep company with. Hasn't that been your expression for a long time, Vaughn?
Yes, it has. And it reminds me of something that a really good friend of mine who happens to be a producer, motion picture producer, said to me once. And that was in regards to the entertainment industry in general. And he said, in a lot of ways, Vaughn, the entertainment industry is temporary employees making permanent decisions. And that really struck me as being true for a lot of businesses where people come and go, senior management changes, and they make decisions that management in the future have to deal with, whether they were a good decision or a bad one. And if they were a bad one, dealing with that bad decision may take years to correct.
Of course, in the public space, when they make those decisions, they can oftentimes move to another job. And so they don't have to deal with the consequences of it over time. Whereas if you're in the closely held business, you're probably going to be stuck with that decision for a long period of time, and you're going to have to fix that decision, or you're going to have to finance the fix for that decision. So I think you need to sit back. You don't want to become frozen and can't make a decision. That's not what we're advocating. What we're saying is you need to step back from a decision and look at the consequences of that decision. How about the consequences of the decisions you made in the past? And have you thought through the decision, or you just made a random choice? Because random choices tend to be random. The results tend to be random, and there aren't too many. The unfortunate thing about Vegas is that some people actually do win. That's the unfortunate thing about a lotto ticket. Some people do win, but if you actually do look at the math, it's impossible to say that that's a good investment.
Yeah. One thing I'd add to that is that theory is great, and education, and getting an MBA is terrific. But so many decisions are made because of what they learned in school, or they read a really great book about business, and they're not looking at either their own experience or the experience of the people around them. And they aren't looking for mentorship from people who have a great deal of experience. Experience is the best teacher. And I'm not putting down the MBA, not at all. It gives you a fantastic foundation. But now you got to spend a few years learning reality and gathering experience, which, as I say, that's the best teacher of all.
If you're looking at making a decision, you might want to apply the technology of the oval table. The technology of the oval table says that I'm going to propose something we do of consequence, not as daily things, but something of consequence. And then I'm going to get the input from the table. And I'm going to see what the people in other departments have to say, what other people have, other aspects about the business have to say. And I'm going to take all that information in and then try and form a decision around the table and try and get the table to agree to either go with that decision or at least try it out or test it. And if you can do that, I think your decisions are going to be far better than you would if you're just making them in isolation. And that's certainly been our experience as people sitting around this table, but also in operating many businesses in our past histories.
If you're enjoying this podcast, wait till you get your hands on Doug's book, We Are Alpha Dogs, available on Amazon and wherever books, ebooks, and audiobooks are sold. Go to wearealphadogs.com for bonuses and downloads to help you and your company become legendary. And if you are especially adventurous, while you're at it, take the dog quiz and find out more about who you really are. Now, back to the oval table.
Dr. Jim Hearn worked for over 48 years in a variety of professions that span active Vietnam-era Army, academe, and federal service with the Department of the Army. Now, most of his time was spent in leadership positions. As a member of the Senior Executive Service, Dr. Hearn was a director, regional business with the Army Corps of Engineers. He's oversaw the internal operating budget, technical experts in engineering and construction, strategic planning, organizational governance, and a $5 billion military interagency and international construction program. Jim has reinvented himself on many occasions and credits a lifelong learning lifestyle to mastering the progressively more complex problem-solving and team-building skills required of senior leadership. And we are very fortunate to have him here today to share with us some of that wisdom garnered from countless successes and, just as important, the failures.
Well, Jim, what I thought we'd do is start off with a situation and allow you to respond to it. Typically in a business, whether it's a small business or a larger business, a crisis comes along, some kind of chaotic situation comes up where all of a sudden we're off path. We're not doing what we were normally doing. We're not doing what we have expected to be doing. How do we recognize it and what do we do about it?
Doug, thank you, Carl Vaughn, for the opportunity to speak to your audience out here. It's a great honor for me. Leading in a crisis or in a chaotic type situation, if you find yourself in that, the first thing you want to think about is it's not a crisis, not in a sense of the word, because when you start using terms like crisis and chaotic, it sets up a negative attitude. That all of a sudden is this overwhelming? And to me, what you have is a business problem. And what are you paid for? Solving business problems. And if you treat it that way, it becomes an immeasurable range. It's like so many larger projects. You eat the elephant one bite at a time. You deal with a major crisis situation, one solution at a time. And so if you treat it as a business problem and not as a crisis situation, it calms your working staff. They feel you have control of the situation, and it allows the operation to go a lot smoother. I like what the Japanese do. The Japanese have no word for crisis. What they do is they use two words, challenge and opportunity. And I think if you look at a crisis situation or a chaotic situation that way, I think you will much better be able to handle a situation, again, because it's a challenge. That's what you're paid for. You are selected for the position you're in, or if it's a small business, the company you found, because you believed in yourself and you believed in your capabilities. And that's why you're in that position. You're expected to solve these problems. Are they hard? Sure, they're hard. If they were easy, your subordinate staff solved them already. And so you're the one that's there for the big problems. And they're going to come at you. Be ready. You get your training, you have your education, you have your experience, you've had your successes and failures, and you've filed all those things away in a Rolodex, and then you're ready to roll on and solve them. So really characterizing it as something that you can do and your team can do is key to working in a chaotic situation like that. Yes, Fawn.
So Jim, when Godzilla destroyed Tokyo, would that constitute a crisis? Just kidding.
I think for those guys around there, it probably was.
How do you deal with the knee-jerk reaction that, oh, no, everything's terrible, how are we going to get around this problem?
I guess you got to have your game plan of what you're going to do. A lot of times, I worked for the Army for many years, and they have, if you want to call them, war plans for virtually any kind of scenario that's out there, and they're on the shelf, just in case something happens. You as a business person should have similar type thing, maybe not formal, but just know if X happens, here's what we do for Y. Who do you call? The first thing you call for your terminology, the oval table. If it's a large organization, it's probably your senior leadership. If it's a small business, it might be your whole team. To bring them in, sit them down, and work on, all right, what do we have to do first? How do we stop the bleeding first and then get to the root cause of the issue? And you want your legal people there, you want communication people there. So you want to get your team and you want to get them activated. The next group you call are either your supervisors, your board of directors, your key stakeholders, because they're going to be affected by whatever situation is going on. And I think trying to hope that they don't find out and you can solve beforehand is not a smart move. Hope is not a strategy. And the idea of communicating, being upfront, being transparent is critical to your credibility. Because once you get caught in something that is not true or not being told, then you're in hot water. The first job that I ever had where I was actually going to run something, my boss at that time said just one piece of guidance. He said, don't drop any bombs on me. If something goes south, I want to know. And I think that is a really, really important thing to think about as a leader. Don't try to hide it. Don't try to bury it, because we've all seen a million scandals out there that could have been handled well if the people had been upfront about it. And so communicating to your senior people is important. The last group possibly is the press. Again, you want to get ahead of the story. You don't want people making up what happened. You want to tell them what happened, and you want to keep the strategy going. And that's where your communication people are important, whether they're PAOs or whatever, where they can then continue to feed the story to the channels that need it, where you are controlling what the setting that you want.
How do you separate the panic of the people underneath you as a manager from the panic you might be feeling as a manager? How do you deal with that sense of panic?
I think that's where your experience comes in. You have to be that, I would say, the adult in the room. Yes, people around you, there's a famous poem, I think it was Rudyard Kipling, called If. I don't know if any of you remember that over there. It's a wonderful little poem. And the first sentence is, if you can keep your head when all around you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, and it goes into when you can walk with kings and keep with top and touch, that's what's important. You're the one that has to be the adult in the room. You have to be the one that calms you. They have to see you as, oh, he can handle this. He's done it before, or she's done it before. That coming across that quiet confidence. I've seen so many leaders that express that, and I've seen so many toxic leaders out there. I'm sure many of you have in your business history that are yellers and screamers. And that does nothing to solve a situation. It may get done, but it's been buried probably. It's not getting done the right way because people are just panicked to get something done, get it off the table. And so, to me, it's really critical that you be the person that sets the attitude, that sets the temperature of the room, getting it down to a workable level. We can solve this. Each one of us has a role to play. I know you can do it. I have confidence in you. That's why I selected you. And all of a sudden, people start believing in themselves. You need to have that belief that you can solve those things, not an arrogance, but a belief in that you can do it. It's your education, your training, your experience, both successes and failures. A failure is just as important as anything else. I said, don't be afraid to admit you failed at something, but I say, don't make it a habit. Probably also what you want to do is as you see things evolving, what kind of alert system could you have put in play that would have allowed the team to sense this early before, obviously, everything went south very quickly. What kind of things should we have had in place? Should we have anticipated this? Did we anticipate it? Those kinds of things are really important to show that you are on top of the situations that are out there. And again, the whole concept of you are the adult in the room. You are the one that's going to give the confidence to your team to build up their stamina, their confidence that they can do it. And I think that is the most critical thing for you as a leader, whether it's in a major corporation or a small business.
Yeah, Jim, I once worked for an organization that felt that Kipling had it all wrong. Their motto was, if you're keeping your head while those around you are losing theirs, you don't fully appreciate the gravity of the situation.
Right.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to ask you, okay, on a small business level, you get your team together. You're at the oval table. Now, how do you begin to attack the problem? Let's go through those steps.
I think you have two things that you have to deal with. You have the surface problem. Look at it as a disease. You have a symptom that's out there. Now, you have to take care of the symptom. But what you really need to do is to solve the disease. And the same thing is true, I would say, in business. You have an event that triggered this situation. And you have to address that right now. But then also in the same way, was there a root cause that brought this on that I need to address for the long term? And many times we solve the symptom, we don't solve the problem. And I think that's where a lot of businesses go wrong with that. I mean, you got to dig deep, and sometimes it's hurtful. It's tough to look at yourself really with a hard view, in the sense that this may reflect on you that I didn't prepare well for this, or I should have anticipated that. That's the root cause. That's not what happened. What happened is a result of that. And again, okay, you got to mend the fence, so you got to fix the symptom that's out there or the problem that's initially. But how do I go back and rectify the source? And maybe it's you, maybe it's a wrong team. Maybe there were no procedures in place. We never anticipated we grew too quickly. Who knows what that might be? But it's that critical analysis as to why are we in this situation right now, and be able to solve that. That is what you as a small business person has to do. And it might mean, maybe it's something that I am doing. And if you want to be successful, you might want to say, I got to back off on this. I got to find somebody else who has this skill that maybe I don't. Now, I'll talk a lot about extroverts and introverts. Again, if you as a leader, small business leader, is an introvert, and the job requires you to be out in the public, that's a problem. And if you can't master the skill, that's why you go to Toastmasters or you go to any kind of those programs that kind of force you out of your comfort zone to be able to do those things. I knew a lot of military leaders in the general officer category who are off the scale introverts, but they have trained themselves to be out in the public. Some people can't do it. Well, if you can't do it, then find somebody in your organization who can do it and be there right behind them. And this way, you're showing your support, you're showing you're there, but maybe it's better that they communicate than you communicate. So it's looking at those critical things that might be causing a problem. And a lot of people are afraid to do that. They're afraid to look at themselves coldly.
One of the underpinnings behind the dog profiles and the oval table itself is that we're looking at the people who sit around the table all having different skill sets. And oftentimes skill sets you don't have as the owner or the leader of the business. And so you need to be willing to tap those skill sets and back off from, I have to be the leader of everything, I have to do everything, and instead let those other skill sets take over where they have an advantage that you don't.
Doug, that's absolutely true. That's why you assemble a team. I used to always try to hire, whether it's a deputy or an admin assistant, who was kind of the opposite of me. I said, the last thing I need is two me's. And that's why diversity in an organization is so critical, because you want people that look at the world in different ways. Because if everybody thinks just like you have tunnel vision. And you're looking at, when all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail. And so what you want is a diverse team that said, well, boss, I've looked at it this way, and I think maybe your audience is looking at it this way. Oh, I never thought about that. So you want all those different points of view coming in so you can make a better decision rather than a very tunnel one. I find sometimes when I'm dealing with a lot of engineers and scientists that all come from the exact same school. Well, they had the exact same teachers, the exact same pedagogical style, the exact same everything. Well, I'm not getting a lot of diversity there. I have a lot of engineers. They're very, if you know Myers-Briggs, ISTJs. They're the ones that, they're very analytical. Boom, boom, boom. Here's the process. Feel it, touch it, see it. Well, solving some really complex, wicked problems, requires somebody who has that disjointed kind of look at the world. They can take disjointed information and make sense out of it. And whereas the analytical people, they're very good. Once they get that information, they're not the ones sometimes who actually bring it up. So your ops people may be great, but who's out there with those visionary ideas? Where's that person in the organization? We're at the oval table. Which one of the dogs is doing that? And so it's a matter of knowing the skill sets of your individuals, when to tap them, who to tap, and then making sure that they understand it so they voice themselves. I can handle that for you, boss. That's in my bailiwick. And then that then makes the whole team feel, yep, we got this knocked because we have the right team to do it.
So that's the job of the big dog, is to actually invite those other people to participate and endorse their values and let them bring those values to the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's
I'm reminded of the quote from Craig Federighi of Apple program development, is that if you want to really do something, you invite a bunch of diverse people to the table and let them bring their voices. Mm-hmm. The last thing I think we need, as I've often said, is 7 CPAs sitting around a table designing a couch. It's probably not going to work out too well.
No, exactly true. What is it? If a group of scientists were building a horse, they come up with a camel. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's an also thing with leadership. Also, leadership does not necessarily have to be from the front. Many people can lead from different parts of the organization. The person with the expertise in a certain area is a leader in a way because people know who to go to. You don't have to lead with that sword and the white charger and saying, follow me. Not always. It might be from the middle. It might be, if you have a high-powered team, from the rear. All you need to do is kind of give general guidance and they're off and running. And there's a theory that I follow quite a bit over there, was popular in the 80s, called Situational Leadership by Hershey and Blanchard. And basically you say, well, that's common sense. Well, unfortunately, it's not common sense. In many cases, people have a style of leadership and they use that in every situation. If the building's on fire, you don't call a meeting. You tell people to get out. You direct them. And as a situational leader in an organization, you have to figure out what is the maturity of my team. If you have a high-powered team, you're probably sitting back, giving out broad guidance and just saying, hey, if you have any help, let me know. But I'm not going to sit here and look over your shoulder. If you have a lot of interns, if you have a lot of staff turnover, you are probably much more engaged and need to be much more engaged. The key is to know when to move through those transition phases. When to be that direct leader, to be giving a lot of direct instructions to your staff, when to back off and just come in periodically, and when to say, just leave them alone and let them run. So it's a matter of you being cognizant of the state of your team and how they're functioning that is so critical in allowing your team to be successful.
One of our main principles is to develop the quality of the people that are working inside the business. And if you're the leader all the time and you never give them a chance to lead, how do you expect them to grow themselves?
Absolutely true. That's why I will say, in working for the Department of the Army and the government in general, in many cases, they do have a very rigorous leadership program. In the Corps of Engineers, we had a 5-phase program. Started off with just people maybe having a one-day session talking about leadership and just what it's all about. And next level, you might be maybe once a week or twice a week for a little bit of time, and you read books on leadership or books about leaders. And so you're building that database of information in your head on leadership. And the next one is, well, I'm in a district which is, it takes up, 3 states. We have programs in a bunch of them. Maybe you go out and visit some of your programs. So you have a budget analyst who sits in an office. Take her out to that project site where you see this construction project in operation. I hate it when somebody will say, or you talk to them and you visit them and they say, well, I'm just a budget analyst. You are not just anything. And you can walk that person through. The work you're doing as this budget analyst here affects this, and helps this construction project be built. You are not just anything. It's what you do. It's this whole organization pulling together that builds that project or solves that problem. And so, it's so important that you empower those people to give them opportunities at the level that they can do it. So if you're constantly sending people to additional training, yes, it's an investment. And hopefully they will pay you back by the growth that they have.
Despite his comment about Godzilla, our adult in the room is Vaughn. I think Vaughn has a question.
Thanks, Doug. When the challenge is over and the team has met the challenge and the worst is behind us, you referred to an exercise called the after-action review. Mm-hmm. In my corporate career, we often called that a postmortem. Tell us about the after-action review process.
Well, Vaughn, as you said, when the dust is settled, the challenging situation has been rectified. We're back to a fairly normal routine operation. It's taking that Oval Office team and sitting down and saying, okay, what happened? What was the initial thing that triggered it? What was the root cause? The Corps of Engineers, we do great AARs, after action reviews, do a great job on them. We put them on a shelf and they sit there. The key is, how do I go back and look at that? When the situation starts arising again, what happened the last time? Can we stop it earlier? So it's a matter of what kind of procedures have to be in place to keep this from starting again. And that's what, to me, is so important about that cold look at what happened, that AAR, and everybody being honest. I screwed up, boss. I should have saw this coming. I really missed it. I was thinking about these things, but I should have looked over here. And I think those are the kind of things that, all right. So now you know that maybe you have some of your checklist right now that you do. That, once a week I check on this, or I check on this customer, I check on this system that's working. I work on a parish council, and I'm the financial chairman for it. And we're looking at the financial reports. And I'm looking, some of these numbers just don't make sense. And realized that over time, formulas got changed. Cells got moved, and suddenly those formulas don't work anymore. Who's checking those things to make sure of that? So it's those kinds of AAR things that say, all right, we need to, not just produce a spreadsheet, but does the spreadsheet make sense? And that, I had an admin assistant one time that she would do these wonderful spreadsheets, and I would say, do you realize that number's impossible? You can't get to that number. So it's a matter of making those checks on the system to make sure the system is working right, that the checks and balances are in place, so that you want to call it a crisis, doesn't happen again. Constantly, and just procedures, policies. That's what results from an AAR.
At these AAR meetings, what percentage of the time is it a recrimination or a punishment type of situation versus a learning situation?
I think the beatings are only minor. That's just a minor part of the thing. No, only kidding. We don't beat the staff. No, I think that's critical. I think is that, well, you want to hold people accountable. Accountable doesn't mean you yell at them. Doesn't mean you fire them. It doesn't mean it is, all right, was that an honest mistake? Was it negligence? That's a different ballgame. But is it just an honest mistake that was made on there? Okay, how do we avoid it in the future? You want people to be honest. You don't want them to be lying or hiding something. But if you're going to say, I'm going to fire the first person, then you're not going to get a lot of good information.
The best organizations I know that I have worked at is I felt the freedom to go in on Monday morning and say, hey, just want you to know we really screwed up over the weekend. We did not shower ourselves with glory here. Here's what happened. And we had the accountability, which was, here's how we solve it. And here's how we prevent it in the future. This way, you're not dropping bombs on people, that they know from you. You were the one on the ground. You know exactly what happened, because when they hear it from somebody else, you don't know what they're being told. And so it's that organizational character that says it's okay to make mistakes. Just make sure that we know why and how they don't happen again.
Exactly true. I think Vaughn has something.
Mainly what I was going to say is that I think we could talk to you for several hours. And would you come back and talk with us some more? Because we have, I'm sure, a dozen questions to ask you about a variety of things. We haven't even gotten into the amazing work of the Army Corps, which in my mind is the unsung hero of so many challenges. Love to have you come back, Jim.
Oh, be fun. I'd enjoy it thoroughly.
Wow, what a great conversation. Alpha Dogs are always the first in line for the good stuff. So remember to download your favorite episodes at theovaltable.com. Stay up to date by subscribing and review us on Apple Podcasts to let other top dogs know how much you enjoy these conversations. Now, let's go back to the Oval Table to hear what impressed the guys from the interview.
One of the things Jim brought up was leading in a chaotic or a crisis situation. And one thing is true about most of these interviews that we do is that there is a great deal of information being presented in a very quick, short manner. So in one paragraph, Jim has told us how to manage a chaotic situation. The first thing you have to do is change the climate, because people are panicking in a situation. You calm that down and introduce it as a problem to be solved. And you're the manager, you're hired with a certain set of skill sets, so you're the person who has to step up and execute that solution. The next thing you have to do is assemble an oval table. By bringing your team together, you organize a response. You divide the work up, and you're constantly reviewing and comparing information back and forth so everybody knows what's going on. You make adjustments to your plan, and you get it handled. Then after that event, you do a cold review of what happened, how did we handle it, what should we have done, and what should we do next time. Jim calls it an AAR, after action review, but it is really the same thing. And the one thing he did caution is that when you come up with something, you can't just leave it there sitting on the shelf and never learn from it, never use it again. So in one paragraph, he gave you all the information you need to know to be able to run in a chaotic situation. One thing you have to, one thing Jim did mention is you have to be aware of who's on your 911 list. And different problems have different 911 lists. I know of a person who handles something in a very particular small area, and she is on that very small Rolodex of people that handle that kind of problem. And if you don't have those kinds of problems, you never know she exists. But if you have those kinds of problems, you do know she exists, and you do know that that's the person to call. So in your business, what you need to also figure out is who's on your 911 list. And in a closely held business, I think the 911 list is that oval table, because you have all the tentacles of the business, you have all the sources of information, you have all the relationships between clients and vendors and employees, all sitting at that table. And around that table, you can then ask questions, you can get answers, you can provide information, you can get ideas, and you can get the kinds of information you need from different perspectives. And that is an important aspect of what Jim had to say, is who's on your 911 list. And in some cases, in larger organizations, you have senior leadership that you need to call on. You might need to call on board of directors and key stakeholders. But in a closely held business, your 911 list might consist not only of the table, but of your vendor and of your customer. And you invite them to the table and you bring in information from them and get the help that they can give you. Another thing that Jim Hearn pointed out to us is you have to have plans on how to deal with certain situations. Regardless of where you are or what line of business you're in, there are still certain plans you need to have. And weather issues being one of them, disaster issues being another. What if a hurricane comes through your plant or your store facilities? You have employee issues. And the pandemic has certainly brought to bear the problems of that employees have and that you have with employees, in the sense that if they're sick, if key employees can no longer work or have died. And how do you deal with those kinds of issues? And can you scramble fast enough? The object of the oval table is to think about those things ahead of time and not have to scramble in a matter of crisis, but actually to thought, like, well, how are we going to do it? And then around the oval table, you need to have trained people who have backgrounds that are backing up the various players. I had a very successful client who told his management team that you need to train someone to replace you. And if you can't do that, then I'll find someone to go over you. So you need to find someone to replace you, because we need, as the business grows, we need you to move on to other things and do other things. But I can't have you do that if your department or your situation is not under control. So you have to train backup. And the advantage of training backup is you learn a lot more about what you're doing than you knew before, and it brings it more to top of mind than you would have had before. So training other people, understanding how you're going to respond to situations, having a game plan in effect. I mean, what if the power goes out for 3 days? Then what are you going to do? How are you going to function? How are you going to operate? Are you out of business, or can you do some other things? And understanding those kinds of issues, thinking broadly, not perhaps worrying about them, but thinking broadly about what can you do and how can you handle those situations. The great advantage is that once those situations occur, it's not a panic situation. We know what to do because we've done it before.
No podcast like ours would be possible without the help of some talented people behind the scenes. We would like to thank Audavita Studios and their director of podcast production, Sean Hettinger, recording engineer David Rosenblad, staging and show production David Wolf, social media Jay Spang, artist Marsha Carrington, and for our transcriber, Jamie Karras. We all hope you have a productive and inspirational week. I'm Rishi Katz, and we will see you next time here at the Oval Table.